Hannah Paxson was born and raised in a family where money and love were abundant. Despite the parents' wealth, they gave their 3 children all the love a child could want. Hannah was the youngest and only girl. Despite the fact that they were not denied anything, the children were not spoiled. They treated adults with respect, were kind to each other and others, generous, and had a strong moral compass. Hannah was also smart and always got excellent grades. She completed high school in 3 years and college in 3.5, double majoring in chemistry and chemical engineering, which was unusual for a woman. Despite her chosen field of study and fast track through the educational system, Hannah also had a decent love life. However, she became convinced that the only sex she ever had was with loving, respectful partners and with adequate protection. Hannah had many potential sexual partners because she was more than averagely attractive. Although she was not a classic beauty, she had a sweet face, curvy figure, a charming smile, and beautiful silky hair that she wore just below her shoulders. According to Hannah's father, Jim, she only had 2 significant problems. She was almost too kind and too trusting. "You're the most gorgeous, kind, gentle person I know. One day, though, you're going to have to grow up, Hannah," her older brother Gil told her during her freshman year of high school. "You can't trust everyone," another Goran brother told her many times. "People are full of snakes and charlatans. You need a little skepticism." Hannah knew her brothers wanted the best for her, and she accepted that they might be right. However, this did not translate into action on her part, leaving all 3 close men in her life with the belief that they would likely have to protect Hannah in one way or another for the rest of her life. There was one incident that was an exception to Hannah's gentle nature. Perhaps due to a pent-up feeling that people were taking advantage of her because of her kind and gentle nature, at the end of her 2nd year at the private high school she attended, she exploded. John was a teenager in whom Hannah was romantically interested. They went on a few dates, and he seemed to like her. Samantha was a sophomore and has always been unkind towards Hannah, most likely out of jealousy. Hannah would have hated her if Hannah was a normal person, but being the gentle person she is, she just tried to avoid her. 2 days before graduation, Hannah discovered John kissing Samantha right in front of her locker. When they noticed a stunned, slack-jawed Hannah looking at them with tears in her eyes, Samantha made a painfully cruel comment and John simply laughed. Then they walked away, hand in hand. Hannah was furious, but a plan quickly formed in her head. She pulled the fire alarm while wearing a glove, and in the pandemonium she made her way into the principal's office and took the master key to the lockers, then joined her fellow students outside. Once it was determined that the fire alarm was a false alarm, everyone returned to class. After school, Hannah went into John and Samantha's lockers and pulled everything out and put it in trash bags along with the lockpick and threw the trash bags into the school dumpster. Unfortunately for her, the janitor saw Hannah throw out the trash bags, took them away, and found what was inside. He reported this to the director. The next day, the principal called Hannah and her parents into his office. Hannah refused to admit to anything, refused to accept a suspension for the first 2 weeks of the next school year, refused to apologize. In fact, she was downright nasty, much to the shock of her parents and principal, as she never showed up. Not even close to acting this way before. The principal had no choice but to threaten expulsion, despite the fact that she was valedictorian of her class. Hannah's father persuaded him to let her leave the school so that expulsion would not be on her record, and agreed to make a $20,000 donation to the school to install security cameras. Hannah's parents were too stunned by her actions to punish her. However, she was grounded for the summer. The following year, Hannah attended the local public high school and graduated at the top of her class, which would have been her junior year. Gil's only comment after Hannah's tirade was, "If you get angry and want revenge, don't get caught next time." While Hannah grew up to be a pleasant, kind, and gentle person, with one obvious deviation, of course, Will Walters grew up in the neighboring county as an underachiever who spent most of his time chasing girls and causing trouble. It's not such a big deal to send him to jail for more than a few hours, but then again, many of his antics were never brought to light. Will was a year older than Hannah, but was in the same class as Hannah due to her advanced academic performance. Will was always a handsome child, and as a teenager and adult, he was very handsome. He was about 6 feet tall, with large, charming brown eyes and light brown hair, and a slender, muscular build. Although his physical attractiveness attracted many women to him, unless they were promiscuous, they usually did not stick around for long because he never seemed to show them respect. He didn't really show much respect for the women in his middle-class family. No doubt because his father never did. His relationship with his mother, sisters, aunts, and cousins had been tight since he was about 13 years old. After 2 years of college struggling to make ends meet, Will took a job as an apprentice insurance adjuster at a vehicle insurance company. He probably knew cars and motorcycles best, so he figured it out quickly. He was soon promoted to installer, but he had no ambition or drive to ever rise above that position. The good thing about Will's job was that his boss was a positive role model. His boss had several conversations with Will about how he treated his female employees, and over the course of a year, he changed it at least as much as possible. Most of the women Will dated were slutty. However, he was looking for a high-class woman and vowed that if he ever became interested in him, he would never go back to his old ways. Since childhood, Hannah believed that family life was important for achieving fulfillment, and that devotion to a spouse was critical. Thus, as a young woman, she had a clear idea of what her family life should look like. She was looking for a man to marry, a man who would love children and to whom she could be faithful and love for the rest of her life. After working for a large agricultural chemical company for several years, she met Will Walters. To Hannah, Will was handsome. She decided that he was handsomer than her, a flamboyant extrovert and apparently respectful of women. After a few dates, Hannah began to fall in love with him, so on the fourth date, using the analytical approach she had been taught in her math and science school, she decided to ask him a series of questions. "Will, I'll be honest with you and tell you that I need answers to some questions," she said on their fourth date, sitting on a bench by the lake with Will lifting her by the shoulders. "Do I need to take a lawyer for this?" Will joked. "Only if you have something criminal in your past that you need to hide," Hannah replied, smiling. "What is the reason for my upcoming interrogation?" he asked, smiling. "Like I said, I'll be honest. I'm starting to like you, but at this point in my life, I'm only interested in a relationship that could lead to marriage. I need to know if you're ready for that, or if it's time for me to move on," Hannah stated. "Now seriously." "Wow, you're really straightforward, aren't you?" Will thought. "Well?" Hannah asked. Will looked Hannah up and down, slowly. Finally, trying to hold back a smile, he grabbed the edges of her mouth and, parting them, said, "Open your mouth. I need to check your teeth." Realizing that he wasn't serious, Hannah poked him in the ribs, pulled away, and said, "I'm not an auction horse, Will. Answer my question." "Okay," Will said, "I was just teasing. I guess you want my answer to be as honest as your question, right?" Hannah nodded, looking deeply into his eyes. "Okay, sex is very important to me, and honestly, I don't know if I could go into marriage with you without knowing how you are in bed. Is that fair enough?" "Yes, it is," she replied. "Now answer this. Do you like children?" After a thoughtful pause, Will said, "Of course I do. I adore my niece and nephew and expect to have children of my own someday if I find the right woman." Hannah smiled. "One more question. What is your attitude towards fidelity in marriage?" "I wouldn't get married if I didn't think I could be faithful, and if things had changed over time, I would have gotten divorced instead of cheating," Will answered with a serious look, although he probably kept his fingers crossed for back. Hannah sat with a half-smile on her face. "Well, did I pass?" Will asked with wide eyes. "Kind of," Hannah replied with a devilish smile, at least as devilish as Hannah could get. "So that I don't waste time with you, instead of dinner, let's go to my house." With that, Hannah stood up, grabbed Will's hand, and led him to his car. They spent the night together. Will woke up to the smell of blueberry pancakes and bacon. In a sexual stupor, he stumbled into the kitchen, following the exciting smells with his nose, and saw Hannah naked, except for her French maid's apron, cooking up a storm. "I was going to wake you up, sleepyhead," she said loudly. "Sit down, I'll pour you a drink." After he'd practically gobbled down 2 sausages and 2 pancakes, with more pancakes on his fork, Will said, "Damn, you're almost as incredible in the kitchen as you are in bed." "Is it good or bad?" Hannah asked with a smile. Though barely audible since his mouth was full of pancakes, she was sure she heard, "Incredibly good, actually." After breakfast, Will helped clean up. Finally, they got dressed and got ready to go to work. Before Will left, Hannah grabbed him by the collar, looked into his eyes, and said in a firm tone, "Now you know what sex with me is like. If you call me again, it will mean that we are moving towards a serious relationship, which, in the absence of serious obstacles, will lead to marriage. If this is not the case, do not call again." "After last night, how can you doubt that I'll call?" he answered. "Because not every date will end like yesterday. I would like to have sex with you in the future before marriage, but we need to make sure that our relationship is built on more than that. So if you call, it will mean that marriage is a good opportunity and we won't be limited to just sex," Hannah said, tugging at his collar. "Understood," he answered. "Besides, we will meet on exclusive terms. Understand that too?" she asked. "Yes, if we get rid of these damn protections," he smiled. Hannah responded with a smile. "We'll see if you call, huh?" They kissed goodbye and went to work. Over the next 3 days, Will reflected on what had happened to Hannah. It took him a whole day to get over the shock of how sexy and adventurous Hannah was, another day to process how fantastic sex with her was, and another day to decide if he was ready to start the relationship that could end in marriage. Not being the most honest guy in the world, Will wondered how much steamy sex he could get from Hannah, while avoiding any possibility of long-term commitment. So on Friday after work, he called her. "Hi, Hannah, this is Will," he began. "That already shows my call ID," she laughed. "Listen, I was wondering if you'd like to go out somewhere tomorrow night." "What do you mean?" she asked. "Well, we could have dinner and then come back to your place and have some fun." "Oh, Will, you didn't seem to understand what I said last time, did you? Can't blame you, considering your brain was probably in a daze after our night. I think I demonstrated our sexual compatibility more convincingly than you might expect. So, unfortunately, I have other plans on Saturday. I will be looking for someone who is ready for marriage, but thanks for asking." Then Hannah hung up. Will was amazed. He had never encountered a situation like this before. After an hour, he decided he really needed to see Hannah, confident that he could convince her to continue their relationship until she found someone else. But his call went to voicemail. Over the next 2 weeks, Will continued to call Hannah, but his calls always went to voicemail, and apparently Hannah wasn't interested in his messages at all, so she never called back. During those 2 weeks, Will began to miss Hannah more and more, or at least having sex with her. He had 2 other sexual relationships during this time, but they were no match for Hannah. Finally, at the beginning of the 3rd week since their last meeting, Will decided that perhaps marriage to Hannah was an option. She was definitely a high-class woman. So the next message he left on her voicemail was, "Hi, Hannah. Please listen to the end of this message. I miss you very much, and I feel differently about a woman than I ever have before. I really see us moving towards marriage, and sex on every date is not necessary. Please call." After this, Will and Hannah began dating exclusively. Once Hannah received an exclusive commitment from Will, they both got tested for STDs. Then she started taking the pill and did not require him to use condoms for vaginal protection for sex. Will was delighted every time they met, the best sex he had ever had. But he was surprised that he couldn't convince Hannah to give up her demand to not have sex on every date. Will greatly enjoyed Hannah's company in addition to sex and thought about marriage. However, he was not comfortable with the sexual arrangement and had no difficulty breaking the exclusivity of his relationship with Hannah without her knowledge, of course. Will was attractive and charming enough to lure several different women into his bed, sometimes even after a non-sex date with Hannah. Will made one mistake and was spotted by Jack, a friend of Hannah's, at Keenan's bar with one of his women. Will dated Jack once, so after spotting him, Will called one of his friends to set up an alibi so he could tell Hannah that Jack was wrong if he ever reported the incident to her. "Hey, Sam," he said when his friend picked up the phone. "What's wrong, man? You're disturbing me," Sam replied. "Where are you?" "I just got back from the bathroom table at San Souci. I'm on a date with Jacqueline, if you're wondering," Sam replied. "Look, you owe me a big favor. You need to pay half the bill with my credit card and half with yours, and in the future tell everyone we had dinner together," Will pleaded. "I don't have your credit card, kid," Sam laughed. "It'll be there soon. I'll send it. How long will you be there?" "Probably another 45 minutes. "Great. Make sure you keep the receipts for both credit cards. Tell the receptionist that you need a package to arrive so that the card reaches your table, okay?" Will begged. "Okay, if you pay for half of dinner, I can lie to you. Send it, but hopefully I won't spend anything online on my smartphone," Sam laughed. Will intercepted a waitress finishing her shift at O'Keenan's before she reached her car, explained to her what he needed, gave her $25 in cash and his credit card with directions to San Souci, then quickly returned to his woman. The next day, he received his check and credit card back from Sam. The next evening, when he met with Hannah, she suspected nothing. However, 2 days later, Hannah unexpectedly came to his home after work. "Hey, Hannah, great to see you," he said, leaning in for a kiss. She dodged and pushed him aside as she entered the apartment. "Will, remember we have an exclusive relationship?" she asked, crossing her arms. "Of course, dear. Why do you ask?" he replied, trying to look as innocent as possible. "A friend of mine saw you at a bar with another woman whom he described as cheap on Friday night." "He must have made a mistake," Will answered slowly. "Friday night. Let me think. Yeah, we couldn't meet, so I had dinner with my friend Sam." "Dinner at a bar with a woman named Samantha?" Hannah asked ironically. "No, dinner at San Souci with a man, Samuel Shields. I may still have the receipt," Will replied seriously, heading to his desk and pretending to search through a stack of papers. After searching long enough to not look upset, he pulled out the check. Here is the date, time, and my credit card number, and I signed the original. This is my half of the bill. We split the plastic. I never signed my copy," he said solemnly. This seemed convincing to Hannah, but to build confidence, he added, "Let me give you Sam's number. You can call him right now while I'm here and can't alert him to your call. Come on, number 627. Hannah interrupted him. "Okay, I believe you. It's just that my friend was so sure it was you." "I have an ordinary face," he smiled. "Do you know this friend?" "You met him once or twice. That's why he thought he recognized you." "Well, if it was me and I recognized him, wouldn't I have walked out of there? By the way, what bar was it at?" he asked innocently. "At Keenan's pub on Central," she answered hesitantly. "I've been there, but not on a Friday night and certainly not with another woman," he smiled. "I'm sorry," Hannah said, melting into his arms. "It's just that our relationship would be over if that were the case." "I understand," Will said, kissing her passionately. "If our roles were reversed, I would do the same thing." After this incident, the relationship between Will and Hannah developed quickly. Will decided to put his other lovers on hold for the time being, especially after Hannah made it clear that their relationship would end unless it was exclusive, and he was lucky to dodge a bullet fired at him at Keenan's pub. Will's interest in marriage increased significantly when he and Hannah had a conversation that started as a light conversation, but turned into a more serious topic. "Honey, if I ever asked you to marry me, and I'm not saying I would," Will joked as Hannah poked him in the ribs, "where do you see us living?" "Although I've never really thought about it," Hannah began with a flirtatious smile. There are two-bedroom apartments in the complex next to mine that we could easily afford since the rent there is 36% lower than our current combined rent, and they're being vacated on average every 45 days. Oh, you really never thought about it, huh? Will laughed. Don't interrupt, Hannah laughed in response. As soon as I turn 30 and get my trust fund, we can pay cash for a house in the Albemarle area, which is in the best school system in the state. There are houses built 5 to 10 years ago on 3/4-acre lots, most of them on cul-de-sacs, and many with solar water heaters or photovoltaic panels. Will said, I hear it's a nice place. Although he wasn't really thinking about Aberdare, his comment was more of an instinctive one. He was thinking about, as soon as I turn 30 and get my trust fund. Will knew that Hannah's parents were rich, although they weren't flashy and never talked about money. Their easy lifestyle, beautiful home, expensive cars, and the charity events they organized made it clear that they were not living paycheck to paycheck. He had never heard of the trust fund. He needed to know about this, but proceed with caution. You're one smart, well-rounded sex goddess, aren't you? He said, holding Hannah's hands. I'm not sure your research is complete. I heard the average price of a house in Aberdare is almost $1 million. There's no way we can afford that unless we rob a couple of banks. Yes, of course, Hannah laughed. The price range for homes there is $800,000 to $200,000, which is less than half the last application I saw for my trust fund. That won't be a problem. Sexy, beautiful, smart, kind, and rich, Will exclaimed, kissing her again, and then quickly changed the subject. The next day, Will did some research about the Paxson family's wealth. From publicly available documents, including tax records for real estate they owned, it was clear that they must have been worth at least $50 million. Hannah could easily have a trust fund of over $2,000. Besides, he never had any reason to doubt that she was lying to him. She was the most honest person he knew. His interest in marriage suddenly increased. Will never mention the trust fund again, but a month after his revelation, he asked Hannah to marry him. Hannah was in love with him and happily agreed. Her family's reaction was not so happy. Hannah's father, Jim, and her brothers considered Will to be a suspicious character. While they had no doubt that he was in love with Hannah, what man wouldn't be, they did not see him as a long-term faithful spouse. In fact, Jim conducted a background check on Will that revealed some troubling, although perhaps not disqualifying, episodes. An outstanding loan, 2 misdemeanor arrests with no subsequent discussions, a job with no prospects for advancement, credit cards that were nearly maxed out, and poor relationships with the women in his family. Although Jim did not tell Hannah about the test, he did tell his sons, Gil and Goran. The three of them decided that if Hannah intended to marry Will, they would support her, but would do everything possible to protect her, including financial protection. At what Hannah and Will knew was an impromptu family meeting, Jim brought up the topic of a prenuptial agreement. So, Hannah, do you want to use my lawyer for your prenuptial agreement? I haven't really thought about it, Dad, she replied as Will's eyes widened. Well, I'm sure Will knows that when someone has a trust fund, a prenuptial agreement is standard procedure, isn't it, Will? Jim asked as he, Gil, and Goran all looked at Will. Well, I'm not sure I've heard of that, Will muttered. Well, you wouldn't exactly marry someone as beautiful, sexy, and smart as Hannah for her money, would you? Goran suggested, glaring at Will. No, of course not, Will replied, trying to sound a little offended that he was even asked about it. Of course not, Goran, Jim chimed in, clapping Will on the back. I will have my lawyer send you a standard prenuptial agreement, Hannah. That will be mutual and protect both your and Will's interests. Okay, Dad, Hannah agreed with a smile. Given Will's obvious love for you and his intelligence, I prepared a little pre-wedding gift for you and him, Jim continued. Will, I know how much you love red wine, so I purchased 12 bottles of the flagship red wine from Harlan Estates. I hope you open a bottle for every important moment in your life together. But this wine is not for everyday drinking, said Jim, lifting an ornate wine box from the pantry floor onto the kitchen table. Wow, Will exclaimed. He considered himself a red wine connoisseur, so he knew each bottle cost more than $700. He always wanted to try it. "Can I hold the bottle?" he asked excitedly. "I'll tell you what, son," Jim replied, although he almost didn't want to use the word son. "Why don't we celebrate the first bottle together on the day you and Hannah sign your prenuptial agreement, the second on your wedding day, and the rest at your discretion?" "What a great idea, Dad," Gil interjected cheerfully, clapping Will on the back. "I tasted this wine once a long time ago, Will, and I know you, with your educated palate, will like it." Will didn't even realize he was being manipulated. The idea of a tie prenuptial agreement had never occurred to him, but he wasn't upset about it because it was clear that this family was going to accept him and he would benefit from their wealth. Plus, he could always try to convince Hannah to change him after their marriage. 2 weeks later, the family gathered to sign a prenuptial agreement. Will knew enough about this to know that neither party had rights to what the other brought into the marriage, including Hannah's trust fund, and that it expired after 10 years of marriage. He was surprised to learn that it also contained a clause stating that if either of them had sex with the other after marriage, which was proven by clear and convincing evidence and not mere probability, then they were not entitled to alimony from the other sides. How naive, gentle, and trusting Hannah was, he knew he could work around it, she would never know. Will loved Harlan Estates wine, and Jim made sure Will got triple share. Additionally, by having sex with a married woman from the past who was in town on business, while Hannah happened to be on a business trip, Will did not cheat on Hannah after the prenuptial agreement was signed and before the wedding. He promised himself that this was the last binge and that he would really try to remain faithful to Hannah after their marriage. The wedding, complete with a toast of Harlan Estates wine, went well. Will's relatives seemed a little sullen, at least towards Will, although they were friendly towards Hannah, but this did not dampen the celebration. The honeymoon to Hawaii paid for by the Paxson family was also wonderful. Will treated Hannah like a groom should, and in return, Hannah did her best to please him in bed. The first 2 years of Hannah and Will's marriage went well, mainly because Will was getting great sex and Hannah's income allowed them to live better than he had before. They moved into one of the apartments that Hannah had found, which provided them with a convenient commute to work. However, Hannah had to insist that they only open bottles of Harlan Reserves on their first and second anniversaries, and not on every little occasion that Will wanted to use as an excuse to try the $750 a bottle wine. Around the 3rd year of marriage, Will began to feel out of place. This may have been due to the fact that Hannah began to insist on having children. Will claimed that he was not yet ready for them and rejected all her attempts to convince him. Or perhaps it was because Hannah continually received recognition for her successes at work, including promotions, performance awards, and patented inventions where she was the inventor while his career stalled. Regardless of the reason or reasons, his dissolute behavior began to surface. Since Hannah was still about 4 years away from receiving her trust fund and nearly 8 years away from the expiration of the prenuptial agreement, these events were too far in the future to curb his behavior. His first romance was with Joyce, a temporary employee who worked in the same office as him for a month. She dressed provocatively, looked provocatively, and acted provocatively. While Hannah had never actually denied him any reasonable form of sex, he knew for a fact that she would never even allow him to try something he had loved in the past. The relationship only ended when Joyce left to get a permanent job. Although Hannah occasionally heard comments about Joyce from Will's co-workers, she was not actually aware of the scam, although Will's sexual prowess had diminished slightly. When she asked him about Joyce, he lied convincingly about how a couple of single guys in the office exposed her frivolous behavior and got involved with her. Hannah believed him. After Joyce, for the next 10 months or so, Will looked for available women wherever he could. When he started working late, which Hannah thought was incredible for an insurance agent, began spending more money than he made on things Hannah couldn't identify or track, and when his sexual activity decreased, Hannah confronted him. "Will, you seem less active in bed or don't want sex as often as you used to." Is something wrong? She asked. No, where did you get that idea? You're a wonderful wife, he replied. Then what's the reason? I guess I'm just tired from work, he replied, shrugging and trying to change the subject. Speaking of work, I didn't realize insurance agents worked late. What do you do when you work late? Well, of course, I don't do evaluations, but sometimes in emergencies I do. But most of the time, it's an office job, trying to help my boss with reports for head office, etc., trying to get a promotion, Will answered. Have you talked to him about this? She asked. Will's mood began to change. What is this, an interrogation? I don't like you asking so many questions, he replied sharply. I'm trying to figure out if there are any problems. I want us to be on good terms so we can have children. She began, becoming upset. Fuck off. I already told you I don't want kids right now, and there's no problem. I'm leaving, he shouted, heading for the door. Where are you going? She begged. Where they don't interrogate me, he barked, slamming the door on his way out. In fact, he went to the apartment of his new mistress, Sarah Collins. He didn't get home until 6 in the morning to change for work. Hannah was concerned about Will's actions and, despite her trusting nature, was especially concerned that he might be running a scam. She was so concerned that she even got tested for STDs and was pleased and almost surprised when they came back negative. Over the next few months, she did everything she could to find out what was happening to Will. She spoke to him in a non-intrusive manner, confronted him, begged him to go with her to a marriage counselor. Nothing worked. Because Will was often away at night, Hannah began working more at the clinic for at-risk women, where she typically volunteered 3 times a month. She increased her schedule to 8 times a month. The work was extremely socially rewarding and satisfying at the same time. She achieved that she was entrusted with individual cases, with which she constantly worked. She usually had 2 or 3 cases at a time. Her second case was a woman named Sarah, attractive in her frivolous style. Sarah was ignorant and only worked part-time in unskilled jobs. She was 5 months pregnant and had a hard time accepting what she needed to do to prepare for life as a single mother. In the first few sessions, Hannah provided her with standard nutrition information, arranged a meeting with one of the charity's volunteer midwives, and helped her resolve problems with her landlord and at work. After Hannah gained her trust, Sarah began to open up. Hannah began to become attached to her because, although Sarah was not gifted with much intelligence and had a difficult upbringing, she was kind and tried to see the best in people. After Hannah had gained Sarah's trust, as required by the charity, she began asking about the baby's father and the possibility of receiving support from him. I'm pretty sure who he is because he had sex with me without protection, and all the other guys used protection, Sarah revealed to Hannah. What's his name? Hannah asked. I'm very ashamed, Sarah said, lowering her eyes and twisting her hands. I only dated him about 12 times, and it was just casual sex, except for the time he had sex with me while drunk. I only know his name, Will. Hannah tried not to show her surprise and concern. A lot of guys are called Will, she told herself, but that didn't stop her from asking further questions. Are you still seeing this guy? No. As soon as I discovered I was pregnant, I told him the baby had to be his, since he was the only one who was with me without protection, Sarah continued, stuttering. He got really angry, called me names, denied being the father, and then left. That was over 2 months ago, and I haven't seen him since and don't know how to contact him. Is he married or single? He told me he was divorced, Sarah replied. Describe him, Hannah said, squeezing Sarah's hand for support. Well, he's about 6 feet or 6'1", slim build, brown eyes, light brown hair, handsome, and he has a mole on his thigh, she said. Hannah was stunned but recovered. Let me try to investigate a little, Hannah said, then squeezed her hand again. When Hannah left the charity that evening, she was furious. This was only the 2nd time in her life that she had been so angry that she wanted to destroy someone, namely Will. She didn't dare go home because she might have killed him that night, and although it would have given her satisfaction, she wouldn't have been happy about being in prison. Hannah sat in her car for several hours. She thought about how Will had refused to have children with her, and now he would have a child with another woman. How it was now clear that he had been cheating on her for a year, not only with Sarah, but with others as well. How he took advantage of Shed by having unprotected sex with her, while she was drunk, and then failing to take responsibility for his actions, and how he spent her money to support his infidelity. Once she had regained her composure, Hannah checked into the hotel. She called Will and told him she was helping a woman downtown who was in crisis and wouldn't be coming home for the night, and without waiting for a real answer, she ended the call with a little cry. "I have to go, Will. I'll call you tomorrow." The next day, Hannah took the day off from work and went to Sarah's. She showed Sarah photographs of 6 men, including Will, and she immediately recognized him as the baby's father. Hannah didn't show her reaction. In fact, she pretended it was unexpected. Hannah then convinced Sarah to take a prenatal paternity test using a blood test, a safe and accurate test that only requires drawing blood from the mother 10 ml and father 5 ml. The uterus is not affected. Drawing blood from Sarah was easy. Now she needed to take it from Will. Hannah called Will at work. "Darling," she began, almost choking on the word, "we have a new and better health insurance plan at work that now covers you 100%, so you don't have to pay for your insurance anymore." "Great, Hannah. How did it go with the woman in crisis?" he replied, a little annoyed. "Oh, thanks for your understanding, honey. Everything worked out as well as it could. I didn't get home before you left for work, and then this insurance thing came up. We need to act quickly because I took too long on this, sorry," she said apologetically. "Okay, if I can stop paying for insurance." "What should I do?" he muttered. "Today, during the day, a nurse will come to your office at a time that is convenient for you and will perform a quick assessment, including taking a small blood sample. That's it. When is it convenient for you, dear?" After some hesitation, Will replied, 2 p.m. "We'll be fine, I think." "She'll be there at that time. Thanks again, honey. I have to run." Hannah ended the call. Hannah paid an emergency fee to have a nurse from a mobile health unit come and take a blood sample from Will and perform a brief examination. She then sent both blood samples to an organization that specializes in prenatal DNA testing. The results were due in 5 days, giving Hannah the time she needed to put her plan into action. Since her last promotion, Hannah was not required to report all of her time on a specific project. She managed 8 projects, so she could split her time between several laboratories at a large agricultural chemical company, giving her the opportunity to pursue her own research or project without the presence of others. When the results of the prenatal test came back 5 days later, they showed what Hannah knew they would, that Will was the father of Sarah's baby. Through another charity that the Paxson family supported, she arranged for her parents to make anonymous donations to ensure Sarah could effectively care for the baby, including providing her with a new home, furniture, baby food, diapers, and other necessities. Hannah also arranged a higher-paying part-time job for Sarah at a charity. Hannah never told her parents exactly what the anonymous donations were used for. Late in the day, when the test results came back, Hannah was convinced that her plan was in place. She moved all of her most valuable items into her parents' house and left Will a note. "Dear Trash. In fact, calling you trash is an insult to trash. Today I found out for sure that you are the father of Sarah Collins' child. Do you remember her? Perhaps not, since she is just one of your many lovers, so you may have forgotten about her. You didn't want children with me, but you had sex with other women without protection, including Sarah when she was drunk. How can you justify spending on your connections with the money I earned? Obviously, I'm divorcing you, and it won't be for irreconcilable differences, so anyone who checks the public records will know what a piece of trash you are. I'm going to see the toughest divorce lawyer in the state tomorrow morning and hope you get a summons on Monday. I will demand the return of all the money you spent in excess of your salary, since it clearly went to support your depraved lifestyle. I put some of my things away, but not all. Don't touch the remaining things, including everything seasoning room shelf, a set of Sabathia knives, Harlan Reserve wine, A crystal decanter and glasses or Delft china, they are mine, and will be picked up by the end of the day tomorrow. Do not try to contact me. If you do, I will get a restraining order and you'll hand it over and give it to you at work. With complete disdain, your soon-to-be ex-wife, Hannah. Despite Hannah's warning to Will not to touch the Harlan Reserve or call her, she knew he would do both. He called her that night while drunk. She recorded the conversation. He told her he drank a bottle of Harlan Reserve and started a second, broke the crystal and china, threw out the spices and planned to use Sabathia knives to cut her into pieces. Once Hannah was satisfied that he would either be unconscious or suffering from the effects of the substance, she secretly returned to her apartment wearing gloves. She carefully removed all the evidence that pointed to her. The next morning, Hannah, pretending to be completely upset, called the police and reported Will's threat. She asked to escort 4 officers to her apartment. They found Will there, on the floor of his bedroom. Broken crystal and china, a bag of spices were scattered everywhere, and of course, open bottles of wine. The police cuffed Will and sent him by ambulance to the prison ward of the local hospital. At Hannah's insistence, they sealed off the apartment as a crime scene to prevent anyone from entering or taking evidence, as she had convinced them that she would be filing a report for theft and destruction of property. Doctors at the hospital initially could not determine what the problem was. 2 days later, they invited an expert from a university hospital in a neighboring state. After a thorough examination of Will, including examination and testing, the expert ordered a more detailed toxicology test to check for possible poisons. When the results of the second toxicology test came back the next day, Will had given up hope that he could be saved. He was effectively chemically stripped of his manhood. As soon as the cause of Will's condition became known, the police began an investigation. Wine bottles and almost every other food item or container in Hannah and Will's apartment were checked. Not a single trace was found. Hannah's management and colleagues at work were questioned. They all unanimously stated that the substance was never on their premises, and that if anyone were to attempt to acquire it, it would result in a paper trail being left behind as the substance is strictly controlled. Hannah cooperated fully in the investigation. She admitted everything she knew about how she found out about Will's affairs, and the fact that he fathered Sarah's child, confirmed the note crumpled on the floor saying she was divorcing him as written by her, and was honest about everything except, of course, making the substance and putting it in a bottle of wine, which she was sure Will would drink. The police never found evidence to convict Hannah, so the case stalled. However, thanks to Hannah's persistence, including a personal appeal to the district attorney, Will was charged with theft and destruction of property. As a result of the plea deal, he was sentenced to 6 months in prison and 2 years of supervised probation, and was ordered to pay restitution to Hannah for his actions. Thanks to the prenuptial agreement, Will's verdict, and a separate lawsuit Hannah filed against him to recover the money he spent on his affairs, Will gave in. He agreed to terms of the divorce due to his infidelity that gave him nothing more than his car and clothes. Hannah was generous and paid for a year of storage of his belongings in a climate-controlled storage facility so they would be available to him upon his release from prison, and $2,000 in out-of-pocket expenses upon his release. After Will ended up in jail, as Hannah and her brother Gil were leaving court after the judge issued the final divorce decree, Gil turned to her and looked into her eyes. "I see you learned something from the incident with John and Samantha in high school," he said with a smile. Answering him with a smile, she said, "How is it, Gil? What do you mean?" "Well, you handled the situation well. And while I wouldn't approve of the way you handled it, I'm glad you found a way to deal with it and protect yourself," Gil replied respectfully. "Thank you, Gil," Hannah said. "I've learned that sometimes you have to take decisive action to protect yourself and those you love." "Well, now it's all over. I hope you find a real man who will appreciate and respect you," Gil said, hugging her. "Thank you, Gil. I hope so too," Hannah replied, hugging him back tightly. From that day on, Hannah began a new chapter in her life, gaining self-confidence and strength. She knew that she would never again allow anyone to take advantage of her kindness and trust. She was ready for new challenges and opportunities, confident that she could overcome any difficulties along the way. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.